Hi there, and thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. We feature those who are in the process of overcoming or have overcome any type of life encounter, life obstacle that at the time seemed to be almost insurmountable. With this podcast, we have three objectives in mind. Our first objective is we want you to know with a confident resolve you are not alone. We want to work with you. We want you to know there are others who are working with you, who want to help you through whatever you are encountering, and together we will get through whatever you're experiencing.
Our second objective is there are multiple options for any life encounter you are facing. We want to help you develop a resolve that there are various options and solutions to any life dilemma.
Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're encountering something that was possibly a decision you made sometime in the past, and if you had the opportunity for a life redo, you would make a different decision. We want to help you with those critical thinking skills that can help you make an informed decision and not encounter what you're going through at the moment. We are the Cooper Culture, a veteran-owned business. We work with business personnel and families to develop and sustain connected relationship cultures within their families and organizations. That type organization is one where people feel wanted, appreciated, and genuinely a part of that organization. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty, who has helped me facilitate this podcast. Today we feature Seth Gehle, who describes a very disturbing part of his upbringing where he was sexually abused for a long period of time, and through a resolve of wanting to end what was a very turbulent life, he was able to turn his life around and become the person he is today. It was through his resilience that he was able to put a stop to what was happening and start a new life. It's a great opportunity to know that your past does not define who you are. Marty, what are some takeaways our listeners can gain from Seth?
As you have said, Seth shared with us his journey of severe childhood trauma and abuse. Seth made a statement in this podcast that says, it's hard to know how to accept and to give love when you have been through what he endured for too many years. He determined that he was going to learn how to love and accept love. And I want to say, if there's someone out there listening that's been through this type of trauma and you think, will I ever accept love? Will I ever believe that I'm loved? Can I ever love? Contact Seth, because he has a great coaching business that can help you.
It's a great learning opportunity of learning how to overcome. Let's listen and learn together. Seth, great to have you with us. Our listeners are going to be very interested in learning how you overcame, as you described, an abusive past. You've overcome trauma from both your mom and dad, and as I frequently say, we're not here to blame anyone. It was just a fact of life, what you experienced, but you did overcome that, and our listeners are going to be very interested in how you did overcome an abusive past, because some of our listeners might be trying to overcome an abusive past, and they're learning from you and similar people through evaluated experiences. Seth, it's great to have you with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. And it's always an honor to share my story and help other people, learn and grow.
Can you give us a kind of a 60,000 foot level summary of the past, what you went through? And again, Seth, our emphasis is on how you recovered. What was the turning point that led you on a better path?
Yeah. So, I guess a high level view would be I basically endured the full spectrum of abuse, trauma, neglect that you can have over the course of 16 years. So I was born to a single mother of three. My father almost killed her when I was about 2. He went to prison, so my father was in prison most of my life. My mom was addicted. She was addicted to hard drugs and became very abusive as I got older. And then because of all that, unfortunately, I was molested and sexually abused on 2 separate occasions. Um, and the second time, it went on for almost 6 straight years before I reported the guy and put him away in prison. So during all that time too, though, I lived in a house surrounded by drugs and violence with my mom. She was very abusive and drugs and neglect, and there's a lot of pain and suffering that lasted for basically 16 years. And I kind of put an end to all that myself essentially, and kind of moved on. After I reported my abuser, that was the extent of my childhood trauma and stuff like that. By that point, I was already living with my grandparents. My grandparents adopted me when I was 13. And so I kind of, that was like the last bit that I needed to get rid of. And I finally did. So that's essentially my childhood in, 60 seconds or so. There's a lot there to unpack, but yeah.
No, thank you for that, Seth. Again, we're not here to dwell on the past, but rather, I think it's very easy for our listeners and Marty and me to get a pretty good picture of what you went through based on just that description. No attempt to marginalize what you went through, but more importantly, how did you make the turn? Based on what you said, Seth, I call you a chain breaker. You came through in a pretty abusive past, and there was a part of your life where essentially you may have been with your mother, but you were raised without any parents. What I think I discerned, at least in part of what you're saying, is your parents, grandparents, were the ones who kind of saw the value in you, and they took you under their wing, so to speak, and made you the person you are today. So I don't. That's what I'm kind of discerning. Is there anything different from that?
Well, yeah, my grandparents were involved as much as they could since I was a very young boy. They knew that I was not growing up in the right place. Obviously, their son was in prison, who was my father, so they knew that there was issues at home and things like that. So they tried to help me out a lot. And then, fortunately, when my mom was arrested when I was 12, I ended up in their house about 5 or 6 months later, and that's when they asked to adopt me. And when they asked to adopt me, I said yes. I was ready to get away from my mom and get away from that situation and live in a safe house. And so they took me in their home at 12 years old. I was almost 13, and I was a rough kid to probably bring in at their, my grandpa was getting ready to retire in a year or two. And then they had this kid, I mean, I knew him and I had a relationship with him, and I loved him since I was a kid, but I was definitely a tough kid. And so they had a lot of grace and patience with me as a young man. But they were the first ones in my life to establish, positive boundaries and accountability, respect, things like that I never had, an example of in my life. So very thankful for them to for the patience and the grace that they gave me as a young man.
No, that's very important what you just said, having boundaries. And you were with your grandparents, what, something like 9, 10 years before you made the turnaround? I'm trying to do the arithmetic in my head as you're explaining it.
Yeah, so well, I moved in with my grandparents when I was 12, and then a few years later, that's when I finally reported the guy that had been abusing me. And that whole process, ended. I was 16, and then a couple years later, I joined the army, and I leave home and do the army thing. When I left to go to the army, that was like more familiar to me than anything than living with my grandparents, because I was more familiar to uncertainty and hardship and pain and suffering, and that's what the army brings you in basic training and just in the army lifestyle. So I actually, for a long time, I had a horrible attitude. It's funny when I talk to people today, because of who I am, they ask me how have you always been like this, and I haven't always been like this. This is a new person that I am today. I held on to a lot of my pain and suffering from my childhood up until I was 20. I was about 23, 24 years old, I think. And that was right before my daughter My daughter was about to be born. I I knew that I needed to make some changes in life. We were not doing well. Me and my wife weren't doing well financially. We weren't doing good just in our marriage in general. But then also in the military, I mean, I was a team leader by that time, and so I was an NCO in the Army, and I was as good as a leader as I thought I could be. But I kind of realized that there were some changes that I needed to make to be a better person, be a better man. So, anyways, long story short, my daughter was about to be born, and I knew that I needed to make some changes, and so I did. And the initial catalyst to that was reading books. The initial impact was reading different books. I read some books on money, so I fixed my money problems. I knew I had a problem with leadership and communication and people, so I started reading some books on that, which, some of those books were like Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership and some other leadership and communication books that I had read so that I could be a better leader. And I was fixing those parts of my life, but I still had not addressed my personal pain and suffering still at this point, at 24 years old. And then as I've gotten older now, I'm almost 30. I'll be 30 next month. And just, 7, 8 months ago, I finally decided that I was going to address all of the pain and suffering that I had gone through, So the statistics say that people that have endured the kind of suffering that I have don't say anything until they're 53 years old. That's the average age of reporting. And I knew that I didn't want to live the rest of my life kind of suffering. And I'd heard other people tell their stories and the impact that they had. And so I knew about 7 months ago, I knew it was time for me to like share my story, and that's kind of when I capitalized, started writing a book, or excuse me, I've been writing the book, but that's when I really got serious about my book and really started taking some steps to get it published. And so this last like 8 months, 7, 8 months of my life has been incredibly therapeutic and due to a lot of reasons. But yeah, there was never a turning point per se in my life. There were like multiple steps that I took. 24 years old, I fixed my money and leadership problems, I would say. And then a few years later, I kind of fixed another problem, maybe fitness or something like that. And then, at 29 years old, I finally decided to dive into the love and the affection piece of my life that was missing. And so I've done it in like steps. It wasn't one piece that I, now I'm good. So it's taken a long time to get to where I'm at.
No, and I appreciate everything you're saying. Marty and I look at that as a journey. But the one starting point might have been when you made the determination to join the military. I can only guess that that could have been somewhat of a shock to you. That I am a retired military myself, and the one thing about the military is there is discipline. And was there a military discipline that you were not used to? Is that part of the turnaround, the journey of to where you are today?
Oddly enough, the Army was like perfect for me because I was used to uncertainty and I was used to the pain and suffering, kind of like I was saying. So when I remember showing up to basic training and thinking to myself, like, this is exactly where I need to be. Like, this is awesome. This is fun. And the reason why I was like that was because everybody else around me hated it. Everybody else, or not everybody, but most of the people there, that was their first time being away from home, or they were scared or upset or mad about things. And I wasn't perfect. I had my bad days, but I really thrived in that environment of like just being tired and pain and suffering. So I loved it initially. And then, the Army gave me structure. That's one thing for sure that I was not used to, and it definitely helped me. I don't know what I would have done if I wouldn't have joined the Army. Having that steady paycheck, a place to live, and food every day kind of built structure for me. And to answer your question about the discipline piece, well, that didn't really happen until I became a leader. And when I became a leader, I realized like I need to be the best that I can be for myself and also my guys. We were getting ready to go to Afghanistan, and I just knew that I needed to like elevate myself, and I had positive leaders in my time as in the military, and I wanted to be a positive impact on the guys that I was leading. And I knew that I wasn't doing it. I knew that I wasn't doing the right thing. I mean, I had a horrible mentality. I had a horrible mentality on leading people and guys, and so I had to fix a lot of that. And a lot of that was self reflection. So the military definitely, you know, probably refined my definition of discipline. But when I showed up, I mean, it was a perfect place for me to be. I like to challenge people. I like to challenge things. And I wouldn't say I had a problem with authority, but I was a smart ass, and I was the funny guy, and I was always trying to do something funny. So, but I took that on the chin. So when I did something stupid and I got in trouble, like that, I was okay with that. Like I was okay with being the guy that was, and I wasn't a bad soldier even as a young man. I was just a dumb young kid who got in trouble, and I just did my push-ups and kept it moving. So
No, I appreciate your vulnerability in expressing yourself that way. Let's talk a little bit about self reflection. I can only suppose how you may have been feeling recovering from sexual abuse. Possibly you were just treated as some worthless piece of meat, so to speak. And maybe there was a period of your life where you were just uncertain what your value is and the like. I don't want to suppose you ever felt that way, but I can just imagine if I had been where you were, I might feel that way. Did you at some point feel a little bit that way? And then again, I'm asking you, what was the turning point to say, no, I'm worth more than what these other people thought of me?
yeah, when I was at like the peak of my, I would say childhood abuse and neglect. I mean, I remember that night sitting there in the bathroom of my abuser's apartment and just crying. I was 13 years old. I was crying, and I was just thinking to myself, like, nobody's ever going to love me. I'm worthless. This my life is over. I don't have like why are all these things happening to me? I don't have a mom. I don't have a father. I've been subjected to all these horrible things, and then on top of that, I might have some sort of disease now. I might have HIV or AIDS or something else that I don't know of. People, if they find out, they're going to think I'm gay because my abuser was a man. He was a grown man. And they're going to think all these weird things of me. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a struggle for a long time. And when I reported him, I kind of just, all of the like negative feelings kind of just went away. I kind of moved on the next day. And as I've learned in my adulthood about trauma and these kind of things, is I guess they call it compartmentalizing. It goes in this little box, and then you tuck it away in the corner, and you don't ever talk about it or think about it. The issue with that is sometimes that box, it opens up, and so you do have to handle those issues. But you know, a turning point was earlier this year. I mean, my book was already pretty much wrote earlier this year, and I was having some major anxiety about publishing it and people finding out about who I am, because I'm a Army combat veteran, 82nd Airborne infantry guy. I compete in jiu-jitsu. I've ran ultra marathons, and I do all of these things that would resemble manlyhood or manliness or whatever you want to call it. And so when I tell my story that I was, molested and abused by another man as a child, like what are people going to think of me? That was kind of my big thing for the longest time, was being scared of that. So, and I guess conjunction with that was the way I handled my relationship with my wife, where it was hard for me to love her. So there's a book I just read. It's called the boy who was raised in a cage, and it talks about childhood trauma and neglect. And one of the things they talk about in that book is when an adult, or if you learn a language later in life, it is almost guaranteed that you will have an accent. If you learn a language later in life, right? Now, if you learn it as a child, you can pretty much learn it and pick up on the accent or the way it's spoke, and you won't have an accent. You'll understand the sentence structure, the nouns, adjectives, verbs, all of those things. It'll come a lot more natural to you if you learn it at a very young age. So the later in life you learn, the more likely it is that you'll struggle with the accent, and it'll be noticeable, right, to anybody who's natural speaking. So love and affection is the same way with a child. So if a child goes, they don't even have to be abused. If a child is just neglected, if a parent is um, knowingly neglecting their child, it affects the child the same way, where they don't understand love and affection, and it doesn't make sense to them. So that's kind of what happened to me as I grew older. Is I never knew how to have these relationships with people. And so my wife is the first girl that I've ever dated, and I didn't meet her until I was 21. So learning how to like love my wife has been a process. And in the last 8 months, 7 or 8 months, I mean, I feel like we're in a completely new marriage now that I have learned these things, and I understand what the trauma has done to me. That's been the biggest piece thus far, is doing my own research and reading some books and finding out what trauma and neglect does to a child, and how you maybe I don't even know if this book teaches you how to recover, the one that I just read, but when you're able to understand the problem, it helps you understand yourself a little bit more, and like why these things are a certain way, why it was hard for me to hug my wife, or when I'm around her family, why I feel a little strange, because of the there's a piece of my heart that's missing, unfortunately, and it's not going to come back. I just have to learn how to live with that. So yeah, I mean, there I have dealt with all of the range of emotions, the depression, the suicide ideations, daily for years. The anger, the hopelessness, the worthlessness, shame. Shame is one of the biggest ones that you deal with. You're just embarrassed and ashamed of what you've done, because part of being in an abusive relationship, or even the relationship that I was in with this man, where he was abusing me, taking advantage of me, or you have like a wife or a husband that's in a domestic violence situation, that shame that you carry comes from being associated with that, right? When I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, I didn't report my abuser for almost 6 years because of a couple reasons. One, I was protecting him, but also if I report him, I have to admit to a lot of people, even if it's just the police and maybe a nurse or doctor or two, what had been done to me, right? And you could say it was willingly done, even though I was manipulated and coerced into all of it. You know, it was against my will, but I had let it happen to me. And so that's part of that shame that you deal with, is like, if I report this guy, people are going to know what I did, and what are they going to think of me? So that's the shame that you deal with and you live with. And I've lived with that for almost 29 years. I finally let all that go a few months ago. And as I've told my story, I've healed through speaking, reading, and writing. I've healed through, whenever I tell my story, whether it's on a podcast or on a stage somewhere, or speaking to a room of people. When I tell my story, it's very therapeutic. One, I get questions that I don't ever get asked, and so it helps me heal by processing those. I also heal and process a lot through speaking, but then reading these books and listening to other podcasts, it helps me learn more and understand more about myself. And as I wrote my book out, it's been very therapeutic to go back and read my words and fix if I tell a story in my book, there might be a detail that I missed, or there might be something that I completely forgot about in my childhood. But through journaling and intentionally journaling through a timeline, it's helped me remember certain things that happened to me, good memories and bad, and they're all therapeutic for me. So that's what's worked for me. And that's kind of what's helped me turn my life around.
No, I appreciate your saying that. And I will tell you, Seth, your past does not define you. The way you recovered from it does define you. And there are some things in the early life you had no control over. And we do have control over our attitude, our courage, those kinds of things. But there are other things we do not have control over. And I will tell you, people like Marty and me, we don't think any less of you because of what you endured in the past. We do think a lot of you because of how you have recovered from that. You mentioned in your life summary resilience. And I'm very interested in learning your perception of resilience. In hindsight, are you a naturally resilient person? And would you define resilience as being able to bounce back and recover from?
Yeah, so yeah, resilience is absolutely that ability to bounce back, to recover, right? And I do think I was naturally resilient as a young man. There's there's so much good and bad that comes from trauma and neglect. There's obviously the bad things are all the bad things. You don't have mom, you don't have dad, you have these emotions and you have these reactions to things. But the good parts of it are you're able to handle that pain and suffering a lot better later in life because your body's almost conditioned to it. So as I go through pain and suffering now as an adult, if I have a bad day now, it's like it doesn't matter to me. It's like, hey, it's not a big deal. I'm going to get through this. And one of the things that I always tell myself is this is not going to be the thing that breaks me. If I go outside today or tomorrow and I get a flat tire or I get in a car wreck or something happens, that's not going to be the thing that breaks me. After all of this time, that's not going to be it. I've already gone through and endured and suffered for X amount of years. This is not going to be the thing that breaks me, whatever it is. That's what I always tell myself now. And that's speaking to that resilience. But, people ask me a lot, how did I stay out of drugs? Because I was never addicted to drugs. I was never an alcoholic. I never did anything bad or abusive or criminal as a child. I mean, I did stupid things like throw rocks at cars and all that as a young boy, but I never got into anything real serious. And I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I've got 3 or 4 cousins I used to hang out with, and all of them sell drugs. All of them have multiple children with multiple women. And, one of them was murdered when I was in high school. Both my sisters have taken paths that are unproductive and they live the lives that we grew up in. I'm the only one who made it out for some reason. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what that is. You can call it the natural resilience, that natural tendency to be better. I don't know what happened with me that was different than everybody else. I was a great student. I was a perfect straight A student in school. And I remember hearing about drugs and like the DARE program was really big when I was a young kid. And I just knew that drugs were bad. And so when I saw my mom smoking weed and then she eventually got into crack and cocaine, I knew that like that's not good. And I don't ever want to mess with that. So even as I got into my adulthood, I never wanted to mess with it. So resilience is, yeah, I would say I'm an incredibly resilient person. I'm incredibly tough mentally, physically, and it's a skill. So I think there is this natural ability to be resilient, but it's also a skill that you need to build as you get older. I think it's perishable. I think if you grow old and you don't challenge yourself and you don't do hard things and you don't put yourself into the fire, I think you do soften up and you can forget how to bounce back and how to recover. And in my adulthood, that's the reason why I mentioned like doing jujitsu and running ultra marathons. I needed to do something that was challenging again to like test myself, push myself through something physically painful and enduring. And I get through those things because I've been through hard times already. Suffering builds endurance, endurance builds character, character inspires hope in others, right? My story wouldn't be so impressive to write a book. I think writing a book is impressive, but it's even more impressive when you find out about all of these other things that he's been through, that this person's been through. They want that, the underdog story is the one that everybody loves, not to not to dismiss anybody else's story, but the underdog is very relatable. He is the common man. He's the one, the one who steps into the arena and fights, and that's what I've tried to be. and testing my resilience. I'm almost 30 years old, and I will continue to test myself for as long as I possibly can.
I want to have you think back to that period of your life, some number of years when you were being sexually abused. And I'm not trying to bring back bad memories. However, there may be a listener right now who's experiencing what you did. I'm reading into what you're saying, Seth, and it may be inaccurate, but you maybe felt enough shame that you weren't going to tell anybody about it for some amount of time. You endured it up until a point where it seems, and this is an aspect of resilience, you kind of had made the mental decision, no more. We're done with this. I will do whatever it takes to turn you in, and this is not going to happen anymore to me. Have I mischaracterized that part of your life?
Well, it's actually a really interesting story. The when I finally put an end to it, I was introduced to this man. He was in his 30s. I was 10 years old. I was introduced to him by an older friend of mine. My older friend was 5 or 6 years older than me. So I was 10. My friend was 16. The man was in his 30s. And 6 years later, when I decided to report him after everything I had been through, 400 or 500 accounts of abuse, I was at his house and I had a younger friend that was with me. And the man had actually made some comments to my younger friend that I knew what he was doing. And all this time I had accepted it and endured it. And I said, "That's like, I can handle it." I didn't enjoy it at all. I didn't like it. I hated my life, but I knew that I could handle it. And I just kept surviving. And when I saw him approach my younger friend and start to groom my younger friend and looking to abuse him, that's actually when I put my foot down. I couldn't let it happen to somebody else. And so that weekend I went home and reported him. And I called my friend who introduced me to him, 6 years prior, and I said, "Hey, I need to talk to you." When he came over, I was crying and I couldn't say the words out loud. And my older friend actually broke the silence by saying, "He touched you, didn't he?" And after, a very emotional moment, the next thing he says to me was, "Well, he did it to me too." So this man had abused my older friend and me, and we were both completely oblivious to the situation that both of us had gone through it. And so that's actually what made me put an end to it. Was I saw a younger friend of mine about to be taken advantage of. Um, and that's probably the hardest day of my life. I mean, that was probably the hardest day of my life. That was that you're so scared, anybody who's gone through that, they understand rejection and denial and all of those things. And, I knew that I was going to catch him. I knew that I was going to put him away no matter what, for multiple reasons, and not to be too graphic or anything, but he had raped me that weekend, and I knew to not take a shower. I knew to not change my clothes. So when I went home, I kept all my clothes on. I didn't take a shower, so that when we got to the hospital, they had asked me, "Do you have any dirty laundry, or do you have, like, when was the last time this happened? Do you have any dirty laundry or anything that you wore to his house?" And I told them, I was like, "Well, this just happened to me about 15 hours ago, and I have not showered and have not taken my clothes off." And so they stripped me down and, tested me and found his DNA in my clothes and on my body. And they went up there and arrested him. So there was a combination of a lot of things, with all of that to put an end to it. My advice to anybody who's going through it, whether it's your, you know, 78% of the time it's somebody, or excuse me, 78% of the time it's somebody in your family, in your immediate family. Over 90% of the time it's like 92% of the time it's somebody that within your circle of trust, and it happens to 1 in 4 boys and 1 in 3 girls, give or take. That's a massive population of kids being abused by their own family members or somebody within their circle of trust. And part of that, the problem with that is reporting, is you want to protect that person. Not only do you want to protect that person, but if that person is known in your circle of trust, whether it's your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa, and or uncle, that person is loved by everybody. So there's no way that person would do that to you, right? Especially as a young 3-year old, a 4-year old, a 5-year old, a 6-year old, or a 10-year old. So there's all these feelings of denial and rejection that you're going to get by putting somebody away who everybody loves. Now, to get to my piece of advice would be that you don't owe anybody any protection. If anybody has ever taken advantage of you in any sort of form or fashion, you don't owe them protection, and you should absolutely report them. And whatever happens with their life, that's unfortunate. Even if they have children or they're married or whatever that case may be, they do not deserve to have the things that they have if they've done those things to you, if they've punished you. And a caveat to that would be, even if you report, do not seek, do not be so, don't be so consumed by justice, because you may not get justice. I did not get justice. My abuser got a 10-year sentence. He should have been sentenced for the rest of his life. Fortunately, he did die in prison, but my abuser got a 10-year sentence, right? And if your abuser walks free, or if he gets sentenced for the rest of his life, what's most important is that you take advantage of the resources provided after the fact, after reporting, and you heal. The most important thing is that for you to heal and to move on with your life, because you get that opportunity to do that. Some people don't. And if you're able to look at that in that mindset of like, okay, I've got to take this, what happened to me, and I've got to turn this, I get to turn this into something positive. Not I have to, but I get to turn this into something positive, and I get to turn my life around. I get the opportunity to be better and to do better things. That's the most important part. So just to be clear, reporting is great, but if you do or you don't, the most important thing is you have got to heal and take care of yourself once you move forward.
It seems you made the determination that, and it's a part of resilience, at least that's my thought. You were determined that you are going to stop what is happening and turn this person in, and you're going to continue your journey to a better life. I'm curious, Seth, was there a point in your consideration of turning him in that you may have feared a physical abuse? And I'm clearly separating that from sexual abuse, but that he may, just try to punch your lights out kind of thing, if you would even consider reporting him?
In my situation, he wasn't physically like abusive at all. Like he never threatened me. So I really wasn't worried about that. But it's funny you asked, because the guy was 6'6", 6'7", 380 pounds, and he was built. I mean, he was very big, a very large man. And, so I never really dealt with any threatening. But the day that I reported, he dropped me off, and he actually came back to my house while I was at the hospital, which he had never done before. I'd been going to his house for almost six years, and he had never once in 6 years dropped me off and returned back to my house unannounced. Never. So I think he knew something was up. I think he knew something was wrong or something was off, because when he came back to my house, my grandma was still there, and she answered the door, and then she called my grandpa, and we're at the hospital, and um, they're trying to sort out like what to do. Like to this day, I think he was there to do something. I think he was there to possibly ask a question or threaten to kill or I mean, if he'd have walked in my house, there wouldn't have been no stopping him. I mean, the guy was massive. So I think about often, what if I what if we wouldn't have gone to the hospital? Like, that would have been threatening. Now, the second thing I'll say to that too is, the kid who reported with me, he's much older. Until the abuser died in prison, he didn't die until 2019. So he was in prison for almost 9 years before he died. And during that entire time, my older friend had nightmares and had anxiety and fear of him getting out of prison and finding him and killing him. because he got a 10-year sentence, so he could have gotten out of prison. And in today's day and age, you can find anybody off the internet just about. So my older friend was terrified of that for a long time. I never had those worries or fears. I don't know how I would have felt if he would have gotten out of prison, but my older friend was certainly terrified of the potential, being murdered later in life.
Seth, I'm again trying to process the arithmetic, but you are what, maybe 15 years or so into the journey of recovery. You acknowledged a little earlier it's therapeutic to talk about this. It's therapeutic to write about it in your book. And do you feel that there's ever a point you'll be totally over this, or do you just have to know how to deal with, I'll use the term flashbacks?
Yeah, good question. I don't think you ever fully recover, right? I think recovery is a journey, it's a process, it's a part of your life at this point, right? The things that you have to do to live a better life and to handle the things that have happened to you, you have to make lifestyle changes. I think that comes with exercise and dieting. If you want to lose weight, a 30-day diet doesn't do it. It's a lifestyle change. If I want to get over my past and become a better person and live a good life and a positive life, a 30-day get help or get better program isn't going to do it. It's going to require a lifestyle change. It's going to require daily intentional disciplined action and to elicit the change and to elicit the growth and the progress that you can make. If I have another traumatic moment in my life, if something happens, another terrible moment, then I have people in my life that know that they need to reach out to me and make sure that I'm okay because of the things that have happened to me, and it's public now. And I've got people in my life that know that if Seth needs a 911, then it's serious. They need to respond and help. So it's a process, it's a journey, it's a never ending road. You've got to it doesn't life doesn't ever get any easier. The sun comes up and it goes down, the world keeps turning. Life is hard, you get a helmet and you keep moving. You got to keep trucking. So when the hard times come, you've got to be ready for it. And there's like a cliche saying, like this too shall pass, right? All these hard times, like, and that's what they say, right? This too shall pass. The other side of that quote that nobody ever talks about are the good times. Like the good times will pass as well. When you are riding your highs and you're crushing life and things are going great, you have to be ready for it. You have to be ready. Something is going to go wrong eventually. This is life, right? It's not just a steady hill going uphill. Something's going to happen. It's going to put you down. And if you're not ready for it, it's going to be much harder to bounce back. So for me, especially me, because of everything I've dealt with, if I don't anticipate the downfall or the shortcomings, when they come and they hit me in the face, it's going to hurt a lot more. But if I know that it's coming, if I know that the bad days are going to come again, when the storm does start blowing in, I'm like, okay, that's all right. I've identified it. We're going to get through this thing, and we're going to head straight into it. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to run away from it. I'm going to drive into the storm and get through this thing a lot faster, right? Instead of just sitting here and sulking in the pain and the misery of why me, why me, why my life, why is everything happening to me? So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, this is life. This is a life sentence that I'm serving, and I better do the best that I can with it. I'm serving my sentence in the free world, not behind bars. But either way, I better do the most that I can do in my life. I better make the biggest impact, love my children and my wife as much as I possibly can, and do all of the right things in my life.
Well, Seth, as we bring this in for a landing, two things come to mind. I want to thank you for serving our country in uniform. You served as an Army veteran, and thank you for that. The second thing is, I want to thank you for being vulnerable enough, feeling confident enough. You can share your story with our listeners because there is almost certainly a listener who is going through what you have experienced in the past. And your encouragement, I believe, to that person is you can overcome. You can be resilient. Your past does not define you. The way you recover from and today forward does define you. Seth, thank you so much for sharing your story. And we want to pledge our commitment to you that we will join you in your journey moving forward. Thank you so much for sharing. You've got a great life. Let's continue our dialogue.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate you guys.
We appreciate having the opportunity to share our and our guests' life experiences with you.
The Cooper culture advances organizations to achieve and sustain high retention rates, connected communication, and trust through personality insights and principled leadership. You can contact us at our website, thecooperculture.com, and you can contact us directly at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. We work with you to help assess aspects of your culture to advance the environment and people to their best performance. We do that through our staff of certified personal performance coaches, leadership trainers, keynote speakers, and DISC personality behavior experts. You can book a speaking engagement directly through our website by contacting us at ron@thecooperculture.com. We look forward to sharing our life experiences with you, some of which are profound, some of which are pretty funny. Some of those life experiences are ones we'll never do that again because we've been through stuff. We truly look forward to working with you, speaking with you, helping advance you in any way that we can.